All right. So this week, I want to touch on kind of three concepts that are going to be important as we are starting to kind of create good, positive relationships with children. The first one is kind of communication. And there's kind of three parts of communication that we'll focus on in this class. Communication is actually super, super complicated. So much so that if you went into the field of communication, it's a bachelor's degree. But if like you went into speech and language pathology, that's actually like a master's and even into doctorate level. So communication involves so many different aspects. For this class, we're trying to keep it quite simple though. So I'm going to touch briefly on communication, and then I am going to talk about I commands, and then I'm sorry, I statements or I messages that you might already be familiar with, and which is kind of a more therapeutic intervention that we often like to have to support children who are learning to identify and regulate their own emotional states. And then talk about commands because clear communication and the ability to change children's behavior is actually really important. I think a lot of times in child guidance, people think that it's quite permissive, and it's actually not. It can be quite assertive. We want children to be assertive, and we also want to be assertive with our communication. We need to have commands to keep kids safe. We need to have commands to work through conflict resolution, right? And like so that you can assertively say what your issue is, and the other person says what their issue is, and then engage in a process of like negotiation and compromise, which is quite kind of a challenging concept that we're kind of encouraging children to engage in because it can be quite difficult for us, right, as adults to be comfortable in conflict as well. So we're kind of encouraging children to be able to, we want to model commands to keep them safe and to tell them what to do and to teach them and to grow them into good humans. And we also kind of want to model that behavior so that they can use that same assertive communication with other people. I am going to go ahead and go to the actual page so that I can spend a little bit of time and like once again, I am trying to keep these much shorter than they had been in past years, because I kind of want to just do little snippets. So these are just a little bit. So there's a lot more kind of writing that gives you more examples and things like that. And then within all of them, when I can find a great clip on YouTube, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it illustrates it, sometimes it's a real life example in a toddler classroom. I try to put that in so you can see a real life example of kind of these concepts, because that's the hard part, right? You probably understand all of the concepts I'm teaching you fairly easily, but how do we do it with a kid? How do we do it with an adult, a family? That's where it gets hard. So once again, language is very, very complex. Not only because we have so many languages in the world, but how we communicate with each other is very complex. Children with different abilities, autism, maybe if they're deaf, or they have issues with processing, are going to maybe have issues with spoken language. That does not mean that they cannot communicate. They might use picture boards, they might use grunts or points when they're really young, and they might have autism. If you are deaf, you are probably going to use some kind of sign language as well. So, but there are kind of three areas I want you to be aware of. Receptive, what we can like hear and process in our brain. And then for like that, an example of this might be a very young baby looks at somebody when they're talking. A toddler, you say no, they look back at you and they continue to do exactly what they wanted to do because they're toddlers. Socially and emotionally, they're hardwired to do that. They heard you, they're just not going to listen to you. Two very different things. Expressive language is the ability to communicate. So that could be sign language, that could be grunting and pointing, that could be using our spoken language like English or Icelandic or Nepalese or something like that in order to communicate and have kind of verbal conversations with each other. Another one is pragmatic speech, as well, which is kind of understanding how to use speech socially. My example that I give here, you're in a boring conversation, but it's with a bunch of people you know from work. Do you just get up and walk away? Do you say, this is super boring? Do you say, please stop talking now? Probably not. Not only are you with people professionally, but that would be considered kind of rude. So, do you change the subject? Do you redirect? Do you excuse yourself to go to the bathroom? Do you have your husband call you on your cell phone? So, oh no, there's an emergency. I've got to go. Right? So, that's all kind of social ways that we use speech. All of these three parts are really, really important. Young kids are learning all of these at the same time, that they're also expected to socially and emotionally be able to manage big feelings. So we have a big responsibility when we're working with young kids. We're teaching them receptive language, expressive language, and pragmatics, and then we're expecting them to be able to use this spoken conversation, spoken words, or sign language in order to then identify and manage those feelings. So that's a big deal. They need a lot of modeling, a lot of support in order to do it. A way that we can do this through is I statements. I was introduced to I statements in my child development classes, but didn't use it very much until I met my husband about 20 years ago when we first moved. Well, actually, it's exactly 20 years ago. We just celebrated our anniversary. But when we first moved in together, we actually had the opportunity to do some kind of group marriage counseling or kind of relationship counseling, which really helped, which is just basically instead of kind of putting everything on somebody else, you only speak about what you know. So I feel is kind of the gist of it. So like I'm feeling sad right now. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling vulnerable about this relationship. I'm feeling all of these types of stuff. And so we kind of practice it in a group setting. And it was nice because there were more kind of like established kind of couples. And so in that kind of very interpersonal one-on-one space, getting to see how other people did it really kind of highlighted how important that was in the kind of establishment 20 years ago of this relationship that I have now with my husband. Um, so I did then was able to kind of transfer this into the classroom, right? And so I didn't have the exact same I statements that I do with my husband, who's the same age as me. Developmentally, we are the same. Culturally, we come from the same background. Religiously, we have the same background as well. With a child, those kind of contexts might be different. And also, I am much older developmentally. I am a mature person. I'm more modeling and supporting them through this kind of journey. I have kind of two videos. One is I statements where kids kind of show you. I like it because it was produced by a bunch of kids and they kind of show their experience with I statements. And then another one from Elmo about a lot of times, and I definitely struggle with this, is identifying the emotion. A lot of times I'm like, I'm just angry. I'm just sad. Well, maybe I'm frustrated. Maybe I'm vulnerable. Maybe I'm this type of thing. So what can we notice in our body that will help us try to connect with that emotional state that we're kind of feeling? And from there, how do we then use I statements in order to communicate that to other people? The more that we can practice this at home, I hope we'll build better positive relationships in our home environments for ourselves as people. But also, it will help you bring this into the classroom as well, because it does feel sometimes weird and clunky and awkward when you're first trying to use I statements. If that's a new vocabulary, a new way of speaking, the more that you practice, the better you will get. And then commands. Eventually, you are going to have to tell a child to do something, and they need to listen to you. That is part of teaching. That's a lot of professional practice with other people. And what we typically want to do is keep it as positive as possible. So instead of being like, don't, although sometimes we have to do that, right? Like, don't hit, that type of thing. Typically, we want to keep it really positive and what they can do. So I give different examples instead of don't run up the slide, up the stairs, down the slide, that type of thing. I talk about neutral tones, understandings, and then things like that. And then I finally, at the very bottom, have a cute little clip from a Head Start classroom that it's for children who are experiencing homelessness, and how we give options and choices. A classroom and a guidance relationship in which children have an environment that says yes, they can do writing, they can do outside, they can do this, they can do that, and positive commands really kind of takes away all of those like butting heads, right? That you have because they're toddlers and they're 3-year-olds and they're new to the earth and they are figuring out how to do things. Even kindergarten, first and second. Why get into a battle of wills with just a few little adjustments as far as giving choices, being more positive? You can take away a lot of that kind of conflict that exists between adults and children from the very beginning and not really have to touch it, and then just focus on the good, fun, play based experiences that we're supposed to be focusing on with kids. Okay. So that was my hopefully short and sweet kind of how do we identify our feelings? How do we support children through those feelings? How do we kind of engage in this process of communication with them in order to build positive relationships? Okay, I hope this helped. And I will see you guys in discussion boards online. All right. Thank you.